Love. Some would say it took a backseat when the pandemic forced us apart. As a family-run and proudly Canadian-owned company, Charm Diamond Centers saw the need to bring us together with tales of love and created the Canadian Love Map podcast. Since then, we've shared hundreds of real, uplifting stories that prove love conquers all. So thank you for listening. We couldn't do it without you. And remember, love starts here.
Here we are in Regina, and again, we recognize that home is where you are.
And home is us.
Home is us, yeah, where we are.
Home is together.
Welcome to the Canadian Love Map. I'm Nancy Regan. Today's love story belongs to Rhonda and Jeff, and it's a tale of teamwork, resilience, courage, and sacrifice. It all started when Rhonda took a leap of faith and ended up with an officer and a gentleman. Rhonda and Jeff, how are you doing?
Good.
Good, thank you.
So happy to have you here today. Tell me how you first met.
Well, it was the summer of 1989, and I was already having a really good year. And that summer, my best friend and I had decided we were going to, stay single, not dating anybody. I hadn't been dating anybody. I had just graduated from my nursing program, and I had been representing my community through the Apple Blossom Festival at the time. So I was happy, and I was just, taking it day by day. And anyway, long story short, I was out with friends one night. My best friend had gotten a boyfriend and kind of blew the single girl thing out of the water. And I was a third wheel out, and all of a sudden, Jeff was there, and that was kind of
Friends
that.
introduced us.
Friends introduced us. And
I was only home. I was working. I was living away. We're both from Nova Scotia, the same hometown, the minus. I was away working and finished college and had a job up there, short-term contract. So I was only home for a week. So it was, I think I only had like 3 days left of my trip home when we met. So, yeah. So friends introduced us.
And what was your first impression?
My first impression was that she was gorgeous.
yeah.
I thought, oh,
You should have told me that.
yeah, well, you are. You still are. And then, my friends were, I was just home for a visit. So like, are you going to start a relationship with someone when you're just home on vacation? We wanted to see each other again. So I think we arranged to.
And it was kind of funny because the community we grew up in isn't very big, but I knew who he was, but of course he was 4 years older. And when, our friends kind of introduced us, I'm like, oh, he's the cute guy that used to work at Tim Hortons. I worked at Dairy Queen next door, but he's 4 years older than me.
Uh-huh.
And then I thought, and then they said, well, he's just home visiting. And I'm like, well, I don't do this. Like, don't do this to me. Right. And anyway, they gave him my phone number. And he called me a couple of days later, and we went out on our very first date on August 2nd.
Yeah.
And what did you do?
Well, of course, he had worked at Tim Hortons. So the first thing that we had done went for coffee at the New Minas location. And then
It's the quintessential first date in Canada.
Yes.
Oh, it is.
Yes,
It absolutely is. And then we went to a movie in Kentville at one of the cinemas there. Turner and Hooch was playing. And anyway, and then after the movie, we went back to Tim Hortons in Kentville for another coffee. But the conversation, I just felt an instant connection. And I knew, I've always had a really strong intuition, and I just knew. And I thought, how is this possible? So I was kind of doubting myself at the time.
So your rational mind was sort of interfering to say, wait a second, this is crazy.
Absolutely. But my heart, and I knew, I had almost like a soul recognition. That's the only way I can describe it. I just knew that all the planets had aligned, mm-hmm. and he was just there. And
And let's be honest, taking her to Tim Hortons twice in one night, like that's a pretty impressive first impression. That's
Jeff, we got to talk afterwards. No, I think that's so great. You were all hyped up on coffee, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So how did it unfold?
Well, he ended up going back to Ontario, and I was kind of like, I really like him. You know, like,
I think we spent the rest of my time
Yes,
together.
we did.
Yeah,
like
we
that.
spent it all
We had
pretty much
about a
together.
week, and then he flew back to Ontario, and I can remember, you know, telling my mom, and I said, "Mom, like I really like him." I said, "I think he's the one," and she gave me this look. She goes, "Oh my goodness!" She's like, "You can't say that." I'm like, I really feel like, yeah. So anyway, and of course, back in 1989, there wasn't text messaging, there wasn't, you know, emailing, there wasn't any of that. So we, I think a week later, he went to a payphone and called me. We had a short conversation because he was running out of quarters, and then, you know, it was the letters, and you know, that first letter was like. Wow.
Apparently she made an impression on me because she dug our letter.
I kept every letter. I have every love letter. So he flew back to Ontario and the letters kept coming. And then one day he basically said, I'm coming home.
My job didn't extend. So I packed my car up that night, and first thing the next morning, I was on the road home.
And we were inseparable after that.
So where did the relationship go from there?
Well, it took off very quickly.
Yeah,
so
fair.
his employment opportunities were better for him in Ontario. So we were making that plan. I was applying for my nursing registration in Ontario and basically orientating the person that was taking my job in Nova Scotia when I found out I was pregnant.
There's one of those curveballs that life throws at you.
It
right.
was. And I remember thinking, oh boy, this wasn't part of the plan. But at the time, we had decided, when I finally told him, I mean, he couldn't even talk. He was just kind of like, okay. So I left him. And I remember saying to him, like, I know we've only been together for a short period, like a year or so. Yeah. And I know that commitment is there and I love you. However, you have to think about this. This is not, I am strong enough. I can handle this on my own. You need to take time to think about what you need. And he didn't think very long. I think the phone rang in like an hour. I'm in, we're doing this. And I'm like, okay. Yes.
Just make it happen.
How did you feel when you heard that in that hour? What were you working through? How did you feel?
Well, honestly, because there was so much, like we were both I was 24 or 5 then, I guess. I'm a little bit older than her. But she was 19 when I met her. She was only 20.
Wow.
And we're so young. We had so many plans. We're going to move to Ontario, start our life. And I just kept thinking about how does this change things? Like, we can't move to Ontario. We can't leave. We can't do these things. And so there's just that apprehension. But then in the end, it's like, I never doubted that we're doing it together. That was never an issue. It was just like, what were we going to do moving forward? That wasn't like, to me, it was a no-brainer. Like, yeah, we're into this. We're going to make this work. Yeah. And so when we decided, she could probably tell the story better than me, but we decided ultimately, no, we're going to stick with our plan.
And we decided basically not to tell family and friends because we wanted to make those decisions for ourselves. If we had involved family, it would have probably been a lot of pressure, right? So we packed up everything we owned. I was driving a 1982 Chevette, loaded it up. He was driving an even older
Honda Civic.
Honda Civic.
Yeah.
And he packed up his, and we headed to Ontario. I look back now thinking, how did I even do that? How did I manage the drive? I was the best tailgater because I had to follow him. I didn't know where I was going. Yeah. And I can remember I had morning sickness. I remember having to pull over the side of the road, like honking and saying, I got to puke, right? Like, it was kind of crazy, but we did it. We got there.
We did it.
We got there. We stayed with
friends.
Yeah. are like family to us.
Did you tell them you were pregnant, or so you were secretly pregnant as far as your family at home knew? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Not right away.
And so, I mean, the secret came out pretty quick because I couldn't hide my morning sickness. But anyway, then I secured a job. I was working at a small little hospital. He went to work carpentry, and we rented this furnished double wide trailer out at McCullough Lake. And it was fully furnished in like the 70s motif and shag carpet and, and the sign out front was the promised land. And I remember thinking like, well,
exactly
this,
we'll make it work.
we loved each other. Like it's going to work. It's okay.
Full of mice, I might add.
Yeah, there's a lot of mice. But anyway, we made it through. And then, at that point, we were just kind of hanging, doing, Jeff was mostly working odd jobs. I had a part-time nursing job and things were okay. But then we did get the call that he would be accepted into training.
So we didn't know exactly, like I said, in the background, we had this application going with the RCMP. And honestly, it wasn't like I had always set out in my life to join the RCMP. I had applied to see where it takes me. And then they called and offered me a position. And they basically said, you're going to be loaded in a troop in, was it April?
Yeah.
And she was due in May. So we made the decision, like we loved our family and friends in Ontario, right? We considered them family. But if I was going to have our baby on my own, I wanted to go home. So, we loaded. Well, we sold his. Sold my Honda Civic for $200.
And we loaded again my 1982 Chevette, and we had adopted a cat, as I had this cat as well. And we had enough money to drive back to Nova Scotia, have one night hotel stay, and we pulled out of our driveway at the promised land, and our muffler fell off.
Not just the muffler, the entire exhaust system from the manifold back fell off of her car.
So it was
we stood there. I remember stopping and looked at her and said, "We have enough money to fix this, or drive home the way it is."
So we
said, "Let's go." And we drove all the way to Nova Scotia with no exhaust. We were deaf.
So you can imagine me showing up at my parents' doorstep. I mean, and they knew we were expecting. They had accepted it. Everything was good. Me showing up at my parents' doorstep, 7 months pregnant, with a cat, yelling at everybody because I couldn't hear anything. Like, it was just,
But happy, a big smile on your face, at least.
Yeah,
yes,
we
were always happy. We were always happy, and my family, I have a wonderful family, and they just welcomed us back in, and we're here for you, and so
then I didn't end up leaving for the RCMP till November. There was a little bit of a hiring freeze on for a short period of time. They weren't loading troops. So I was able to be there when our daughter was born and for the first 6 months. But it was a blessing that also made it hard to leave. I left for training when she was 6 months old. But I left for Regina in November
of
that year.
92, 30 years ago.
Yeah, leaving her behind with a 6-month-old.
Oh my gosh.
And then we were committed, like we were living common.
Yes.
We planned to be married.
Yes, and we were engaged.
Yes.
He did give me a ring.
That's a story too.
Yeah, that's a funny story too.
Oh, I think I need that story then, please. This podcast is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, Canada's largest family-owned jewelry store. They are proud to be putting love on the map. And the staff at Charm Diamond Centers are thrilled to be a part of your love story too. So visit charmdiamondcenters.com or one of your local stores. Love starts here.
So here I am in the promised land in my 70s motif, laying on the sofa after watching probably General Hospital on a 13-inch black and white TV. Anyway, Jeff had come home from work that day. I was off, and he, got showered and everything, and he kind of dressed up a little bit. And I'm like, "Are you going somewhere? Like you and the guys going out?" And he goes, "No." And he goes, I don't know. I just felt like dressing up. And I'm like, "Okay." And I'm in my sweats, pregnant, and he hands me the cat. He goes, "I thought I'd take some pictures of you and the cat." And I'm like, "Well, look at me." Like, okay. And so anyway, he goes, "We'll fix the cat's collar." So I'm like, okay. So I'm turning the collar around, and then my ring was on the collar. And
Wow,
I was
good
like,
one.
oh my goodness. So he got down on one knee. He, we took the ring off the cat's collar, obviously, and he was shaking. Like his hands were clammy. And he's like, I really love you. And I want you to marry me. And I'm like, yeah, like,
What do you
okay.
think of? I think what you actually said was, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's my first thing. Like, what do you think I'm going to say? I'm literally in the promised land, pregnant,
my
middle
gosh.
of nowhere. Like, come on.
Oh my gosh. Well, that was a really important milestone in, as you say, what became a real adventure in life. And you have moved all over the country in this past 3 decades. Yes. What has that been like?
We've lived in 11 different houses. I've had 7 different transfers.
Yeah, we've been in 4 provinces.
4 provinces, yes.
And I mean, I knew very early on that this was going to be an adventure. I mean, getting a phone call one afternoon saying, hey, like he's in training. Hey, what are you doing in 2 weeks? We have to get married. And I'm like, what? And I was like, well, okay. Because at the time, we were considered, the RCMP didn't recognize the common law status, right? We weren't legally married, and that's what they needed in order for me to be moved along with him. And our first posting was in British Columbia. So moving from Nova Scotia to British Columbia was a big deal when,
you had no money.
You had no money and no job, right? So anyway, so that was the next thing. We had to be married before he graduated. So it was February of 92. And I mean, living here in Regina now, I know that a lot of people don't want to come to Regina in the middle of February, especially to get married. And so that in itself was a whole other story.
Yeah, I called her up. It was a long story, but bottom line is, because we weren't legally married, the government was only going to pay to move me. They weren't going to pay to move Rhonda and our daughter, because they kept referring to her as my girlfriend. I said, she's my fiance, she's my common law spouse. But anyway, they didn't. I mean, times have changed. Times have changed.
Hallelujah.
But so, I mean, I went to a troop counselor and asked, how do I fix this? And he got back to me and said, well, if you're married before you graduate, they have to pay to move her. So I called her up and said, let's push the wedding up. Come on out. And then I had to cancel it because we got confined. So
I was planning to go out. It was around Valentine's. I was planning to go out to get married. And then he's like, no, you can't come. Our troop is confined to barracks. I can't get off base. We can't get married. I'm like, okay. So, 2 weeks later, I hopped on a plane, and I can remember leaving, my baby. And I had never been west of Toronto, and I got on a plane and landed on the frozen prairie. And I remember thinking, like, what am I doing? And then, I took a cab to the hotel, and he couldn't even meet me until after 4:30, I think it was. And I remember, we were staying close to the mall, so I had gotten my hair done. And I remember going, we got married in an office downtown Regina by Justice of the Peace. Wonderful, wonderful guy. And I walked in, and I didn't know anybody but Jeff.
All my troop mates were our witnesses, like my best man.
I hadn't met anybody.
Maid of honor were all my troop mates. So Ron didn't know any of them.
I just giggled through the whole thing. Like I was just like, I can't believe this is actually happening. I'm actually getting married. I mean, I love him, the commitment. I didn't need the paper. I didn't need any of that. But I just thought, this is not the little girl's dream of getting married. And I remember after the ceremony and leaving, we went down to Golf Steakhouse, which is a steakhouse still today. And I remember walking in and sitting down, and the waiter came over, and I just looked at him. I said, I just got married. I don't know any of these people but him. And I said, I would like to have a drink, please. And he just laughed, like, absolutely. And that's our wedding.
That was probably the best order he ever had. Would you say you're opposites? Do opposites attract?
Completely opposite.
We are.
In this case,
yes. If there's a definition of yin and yang, you could put our picture in the dictionary.
Yes.
We are, I enjoy cooking. She cleans. That's a perfect example.
And
of
I
how
always joke about that. I'm window, he's aisle.
Yes, but that just shows why I think those relationships like that often work so well.
Mm-hmm. I'm very, I don't want to say flighty, but I'm very, I'm more spiritually sensitive, more whatever. Like I'm up here, like I would, adopt all the kids, all the puppies, all the animals. He's like, hey, bringing me down to like, he's my ground.
I was going to also ask you about your daughters. What is your daughter's description of you? I read that in your email and I loved it.
So we have two beautiful daughters and they're just beautiful souls. Our oldest daughter, and she said, my pop is a copper and my mom is a hippie. And it's like, absolutely, like that, that's very much it. I, kind of go through my world sensing and feeling, and, Jeff is always my ground, because I can be like, my head in the clouds.
But you see, I'm fortunate now. I'm in a training role. I'm not frontline policing anymore. Mm-hmm. But I can, like I said, if you're dealing with, 3 or 4% of the population that does 90% of the bad things, it's easy to look at society and the community like everybody's like that. I can't. But then she can help me recognize that no,
there are good people.
There's a lot of good people. In fact, the overwhelming vast majority of the people in our communities are excellent people. Wonderful people, same as our youth. They're great people. Mm-hmm. And then she can help me see that again, put me back in that world. So our yin and yang, I think it works pretty good. Mm-hmm. Actually, we're quite opposites, but
yeah, this will be a whole new chapter. The next chapter of your lives.
Definitely.
When I went through training, I couldn't wait to get out of Regina. I hated it here because, you're stuck at training. It's hard. It's difficult. You're separated from your family. I went through training during the winter. It's cold, and here we are. I always liked training though. So eventually I ended up back at the training academy as an instructor. And to make a very long story short, if you're going to move teenage daughters to a community and get them through high school, you better accept the fact that they might marry local boys. And that's what happened. So our daughters settled in Regina and our family's here. So now this has become home for us. I never saw that. If you'd asked me 15 years ago, we would have both said, no, we're moving back to Nova Scotia. That's it. But here we are, here we are in Regina. And again, we recognize that home is where you are.
And home is us.
Home is us. Yeah. Where we are.
Home is together. I do have a little poem. Would you be interested in listening to one?
Oh my gosh. I would love for you to read it.
Okay. So this is called Missing Home. On days like this, I miss my home. An RCMP family were meant to roam. Far from the ocean where my soul belonged, I'm on the prairie with endless skies and spring wind song. When the time is past and I'm long gone, will they remember where my roots grew strong? Many generations of mine who came before walked the dikes and the Bay of Fundy shore. I am thankful to explore this land. I signed on this journey to walk hand in hand. I fell in love with this Canadian prairie, even if being far from home can sometimes be scary. My heart is split between what was and what is, torn between the gift given and those I miss. As a Nova Scotia girl with salt in her blood, I miss my toes in the warm red mud. A soul like mine came here to grow, for this journey is one I chose, I know. And as I stand in an open field with the sun on my face, I am truly blessed with God's good grace. From the mountains to the oceans and now this flat land, I am still proud to hold his hand. The time has moved fast and we both now are gray. Watching our grandsons grow will fill us with love each day.
Mic drop.
That was just a little ditty.
Beautiful.
She whips those off in like an hour. I don't know. She's like, wow. I love it.
That's beautiful. I'm going to be thinking of you on February 28th. And I wonder if I were to call you on your wedding anniversary, will I find you at Tim Hortons?
You may, yeah.
You never know.
We should, yeah. Yeah, that's fun.
Well, I think you are fabulous, both of you and as a team. And I just want to say a huge thanks for being willing to share your story with us. It's so beautiful.
It's so
Thanks,
awesome. And thanks for having us.
Yes,
I
thank
love
you.
it.
Thanks so much for listening to the Canadian Love Map. If you love us, please subscribe and share. We'll be back next week with another love story to add to the map. This podcast is presented and made possible by Charm Diamond Centers. It's hosted by me, Nancy Regan, and is produced and distributed by Podstarter.